Welcome to the 401k Audit CPA Success Show, where we're 100% focused on helping companies across the United States prepare for their 401k audit. If you have 100 eligible participants in your 401k plan, then this podcast is for you.
Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. Once again, joined by Kim Moore, here, the Director of Audit at Summit CPA, and we're going to talk about a not so fun topic, but I think one that's pretty hot right now and pretty relevant. We're going to talk about lawsuits as it relates to the 401k. So welcome to the show, Kim.
Thanks, Jamie. Glad to be here. As you mentioned, not a topic that probably everybody wants to hear about, but very important and can be very costly to your plan. If someone does bring a lawsuit against you, or you get caught up in, maybe a type of class action type lawsuit, those can happen as well. So we thought we would talk about it today. One of the reasons I wanted to bring this up today, we're sitting at 2021. The market's been doing fairly decent and fairly stable, but if we look back in 2020, of course, during the pandemic, the market was pretty volatile, and we had some pretty big downturns at different times. Research shows that one of the big times that lawsuits can occur against plans is right after there's been a major downturn in the market. There was a study done recently, and there's these studies come out fairly frequently, but as they looked over time, if you go back, for example, in 2006, which was a fairly stable investment period, there were only 8 lawsuits brought against 401k plans. But by 2008, that number had jumped to 107. And if you remember, 2008, 2009 was the huge market downturn related to all of the mortgage situations that were going on, and companies were going out of business, and there's just all kinds of problems, which caused the market to take a huge downturn. Now, the two don't necessarily go together. I mean, just because the mortgage business was having difficulties, you'd say, well, what does that have to do with my 401k plan? But what these studies have shown is that participants that maybe aren't paying that much attention to their overall plan investments and how they're tracking, or maybe don't watch the market on a regular basis, they may get a statement in their mail or maybe in their email, and they're expecting to see a certain number because it's been historically around that number, and all of a sudden, they see a 50% drop, and that just shocks them. And although they may and probably did choose the investments for their particular account, and they could change those investments at any time, and obviously it's not the plan's fault that the market goes up or down. What the studies have shown is that participants, they get nervous, they feel like that's somebody's fault, and so they will try and sue the plan over that. So we thought it's a timely topic because we did just go through a downturn. People may be nervous. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the pandemic either. So, as people maybe have lost jobs or lost some of their income, another thing that might set them off to want to file a lawsuit. So anyways, we thought this would be a good topic, relevant because, what's been happening.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I know that, I get my statement in the mail for my 401k all the time. And, the rational person says, okay, the market's down 20%. This is the timing of my statement. It's probably going to be down a little bit, unless you have a really good investment mix. But I think it's not uncommon for my 401k statement to going up and down with the market. And so I think a lot of people see that and understand that. But a lot of people, like you said, are just looking for someone to blame or looking for a reason behind that, especially the closer you get to retirement. Obviously I have a little while away before I get to retirement. I know there's time to recoup those gains, but if you're getting closer to retirement and you forgot to change your investment mix, those can really hurt. So
Right. And it could definitely throw off your retirement plans if you're real close to retirement and there's a downturn. It's not uncommon for any type of investment that you might have to postpone your retirement a couple years or longer if the market does take a huge downturn. We wanted to just give everybody a sense, there was a study done in 2020 by Boston College. They have something called the study or Center for Retirement Research, which this is the kind of stuff that they get excited about. They took a look at past lawsuits and what happens with them, because obviously just because someone files a lawsuit doesn't mean you're automatically going to be losing a lot of money if you're the company. They found 20% of them was dismissed. So, good chunk, but, certainly not the majority. 16% of them were settled. So there was probably something going on by the company, but they were able to settle. 4% were on
16%, right? 16% were
Oh,
settled?
16% settled,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah. And then 4% on appeal. So that would mean you lost the case, obviously, and it's probably, or maybe the other side lost. Somebody lost, and they're appealing it. The bad news is that 60% of them were still pending. So the more than half had not been settled, and they'd been going for a while when they took the study. So that's another kind of negative factor for you if you're running a 401k plan and you're worried about this, that um, they may be frivolous lawsuits or maybe not, but that doesn't mean that they automatically just go away. They can take time to work through the system. Depending on what it is, the courts may hear it sooner or later. Obviously, in this case, it sounds like later, probably more often than not. So, it can take up a lot of your time. Obviously, it's a lawsuit. It's a legal action. You still have to address it, even if you believe there's just totally no basis for it. That doesn't mean you can just ignore it. It's still a lawsuit, so you got to work through it.
So the study was done in 2020. Do you know how far back they looked? Because that number really surprised me when you showed me that as 60% pending.
I believe, I don't have the exact data, but I know it was several years.
Okay. So they could be taking a couple of years to go anywhere. And then I guess the question is during that time, obviously if a lawsuit's pending for 2 years, like how much of your time, I mean, again, occasionally a question will come through or someone's digging into something, but it's probably not a ton of time, at least. It's just the stress of having that outstanding, I'm guessing.
Right. And depending on the size of your company, you may have in-house attorneys or not, or you may have in-house attorneys that don't have any experience in this area. And quite common with this kind of litigation that you would go get outside counsel, which of course you got to pay for. And we all know attorneys are not cheap. So again, it's time, it's money, it's stress, because you just don't know when it's even going to come up, and maybe it would be resolved quickly once it comes up, but it takes a long time just to get to that point. So not something that you really want to, the path you want to go down if you can at all avoid it. So we wanted to bring this up today, make sure it's kind of on your radar, and talk about, okay, so I'm a plan sponsor. I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. But you just told me I still might have to worry about litigation. So what can I do to avoid it? That's kind of what we wanted to talk about and where we wanted to kind of focus the meat of today's presentation on.
Yeah, so let's start there, I guess. So, do you have a couple topics or a list of what are the main reasons for these lawsuits?
Yeah, the first thing, and we kind of alluded to this at the beginning, is poor investment returns, which of course, as a plan sponsor, you can control the fund lineup, so you can control how many different options a person has, but you can't control the selections that they make. You can't obviously control the market, so there's limited things that you can do here, but first off, make sure that the options are participant directed, which the vast majority of 401k plans are, but that's not always the case, not 100% of the case, and it's not required that they be participant directed. So if for some reason yours are not, or maybe the employer contributions, you're selecting the investment option there, I would take a look at that, because that is, something you might not come out so well in a lawsuit if the market heads downward and the investment you selected happens to be one of the ones that's not doing so well. Also, a lot of plans have a default investment options. So especially if you have auto enroll in your plan. So the, once a participant hits a certain eligibility set of requirements, which may be just that they joined your company, so it might be upon hire, they're automatically enrolled in the plan unless they take action to decline enrollment. So it's more of a passive enrollment versus a lot of plans where you had to fill out a form or go online and sign up. With auto enrollment, you're automatically enrolled unless you take action to not enroll. In those types of plans, they will always have a default investment option, because if the person's not taking any action to enroll, then they may not also be taking action to select investment options, but their money has to go somewhere. So they'll have a default investment option. Most of the time, those things are either target date retirement accounts, so they're going to select a default account that matches your anticipated target retirement date. So if it's a long way away, they'll have more equity investments. If it's closer to retirement, obviously they would have less risky. So the investments in those funds are targeted based on how long you have till retirement. Or it may be a kind of a balanced fund or something called a stable value fund, which is really seeking to just maintain the investment and get a little bit of income, usually something like interest. They're usually those types of investments which tend to be less risky, but they wouldn't necessarily have to be. So again, that's an area you would want to check out. If your plan has a default investment option, take a look at it periodically, make sure, which you should be reviewing your investment options anyways, but pay particular attention to this one, because if it's an investment that's subject to a lot of fluctuation, again, that could be lawsuit material for somebody, and it would be difficult to defend yourself. We kind of mentioned this already, but a good thing to do to help defend yourself if someone brings one of these lawsuits is make sure that you're reviewing the investments on a regular basis. We recommend quarterly. You could do it more often or less frequently if you feel that you're comfortable with that, but often enough so that you are watching the investment options you have if they're not tracking close to their peers. So that doesn't mean every fund has to be making tons of money. It just has to be tracking to its peer, because you want to have a good diversified mix of options. So maybe the bond funds right now are not doing well. That doesn't mean you get rid of all your bond funds. It just means that you want your bond fund to be tracking to its peers. So make sure you're doing those evaluations, make sure you document those. What we've seen, if these cases do go to court and the plan sponsor is able to show that, hey, I offered a diversified mix, we did evaluate the investments, we replaced investments if they were not performing as well as they should to their peers, and they're participant directed. So if someone chose a fund and that particular sector was not doing really well and they left their money in there, the courts will usually find in favor of the plan or the plan sponsor. Any of those pieces missing, then that can be problematic. And of course, the documentation is going to be key. So it doesn't do you any good.
Yeah, can we talk about
No.
the documentation a little bit? So I know, like,
Absolutely.
I've seen companies have like investment boards or people on that board. Like, do they just take minutes, like meeting minutes of, okay, we're starting the review at 8:50 a.m. and we're gonna, this is the talk about each investment. Just really have minutes and notes on it each quarter. How would you recommend them doing that?
Yes. Yeah, we recommend definitely minutes. Usually if you have an investment advisor, they'll put together a packet, and that packet is what you're going to review in the meeting. And the packet will outline, if it's a good either firm or individual that's doing this for you, they'll outline a criteria that you want to look at all your investment options to. And so, just because it goes down a little bit, that's not alarm bells going off. But if it starts tracking downward, and again you're tracing it to its peers, if it starts tracking downward, you might put it on a watch list, and then you'll say, well, next quarter or next review, whenever it is, we're going to see if that's improved. If it hasn't, then we're going to consider for replacement. Then obviously you would want to see in the next set of meeting minutes, you addressed it appropriately depending on what happened to it. Usually the investment advisors will also talk to you about funds where maybe the fund manager's changed, they've left, or they're changing the strategy for that particular fund, that doesn't necessarily mean you'd want to change it, but those are things you'd want to talk about on this committee. So yeah, you want to make sure that you document all of that in either meeting minutes. I would keep that packet, kind of keep it all together. So if you ever had to show somebody, here's what we talked about, here's what we were looking at, you would have that kind of documentation. The other thing that's really important here, I mean, it's good if you have these meetings and you're going through the analysis, but it doesn't do you the best if you're not communicating to your employees that you're doing that. So you want to let your employees know, at the very least, that you have a committee, they meet, whatever it is, monthly, quarterly, annually. Here's what we take a look at. And here's what the last meeting, well, here's what we talked about. Here's what we found. If you're talking about replacing an investment, you want to give the employees plenty of heads up so that they can move their money around if they want to. Maybe they don't like what you're going to replace it with. But communication is important so that they know that you're monitoring things that may lessen their likelihood, to get all freaked out if things suddenly do take a downturn. At least they know you're looking at it, you're kind of looking out for them. And that communication will also help them. So if there is a huge downturn, they're not surprised when they get their next statement. They might be a little surprised when they open it up, but then hopefully they'll remember, oh yeah, they told me, that, yeah, the market took a downturn, so my next statement might look like this. So, it helps on the communication and the kind of the surprise element.
So it sounds like, I mean, as with anything in business, documentation and communication is key here. So you want to make sure you're hitting those two things. And I'm guessing, based on the other areas of lawsuits, those words are going to come up again. So let's jump into the next one. So what's really the next area that you are common to get lawsuits in?
Yeah, we the next area, and this one is totally under your control, if a problem occurs in the administration of the plan. So you didn't if someone asked you to withhold 10% of their pay, it got missed somehow. You find out 2 or 3 payrolls down the line, oh, we forgot to do that, or we just didn't implement it. That might be an example. The match doesn't get applied properly, or the match doesn't get put into accounts. There's timeliness issues. So, we did everything all okay. Dollar-wise, we just didn't put it into the accounts on time. So all those kinds of things. There's others examples, distributions not handled properly. So if you think about every area that you're handling in terms of the plan administration, you make a mistake. Obviously, you should have procedures in place and controls to catch the mistake. But as soon as you know about it, you want to correct it. But the big thing here is communicate with the employee. I mean, actually sit down. Don't just do it and say nothing. Actually sit down with the person, explain what happened, explain what you did, why you did what you did, because there are regulations usually around mistakes and how you have to correct them, what you're required to do, what you're not required to do. But I think it really helps if you communicate to the employee so that they know. Most people, if they know you just made an honest mistake, there was no intent there, and as soon as you knew about it, you fixed it, you made them whole, if you will. Then most people will just say, okay, that they know this is complicated, there's a lot to it, mistakes happen, we're all human, and they'll just go on and they won't even think any more about it. But if you don't tell them, don't explain, they maybe find out about it on their own, and then they have to tell you. That kind of sets up a thought pattern inside these folks that maybe they're really not doing what they should be doing, and maybe I'm getting cheated, or they're not not using my money well and putting it in my plan right away, and that can set them off. One other thing we see a lot, we've had plans that are our clients that will get, especially DOL audits. There are also IRS audits, but the DOL ones are the ones that are most concerning here. And I always ask the folks, do they tell you why you got selected for audit? Or it might be an investigation, might not be a full audit, maybe just an investigation. Very rarely will they tell you. What the answer that the DOL will give you is that they randomly select audits or plans for audit, just because they do audits just to make sure things are going well. But they also, and I think this is probably what happens more often, is that they will investigate something if they hear from a participant. So if they then get into the investigation and they start looking at individual accounts, that's usually a clue that a participant or maybe more than one participant complained, and they're looking at those particular accounts. Quite often, the person that's complaining is not upset about the 401k plan. They're upset about something else. Maybe they felt like, they didn't get a raise when they should have. They should have got a promotion and they didn't get it. Maybe there was a termination type situation. So it might have nothing to do with our participation in the 401k plan, but it's an easy way to get back at a company, is go and complain to the Department of Labor that, hey, these people did something with my money that they shouldn't have done, which may totally not be true. But the Department of Labor will almost always, unless they really believe it's not true, but in most cases they will investigate, and they do that through an investigation or an audit. So again, another reason why communication is really important, and that's all kinds of communication, because as long as your employees know what you're doing and why, they may not like it, but at least if they understand why, that tends to not start up this chain where they'll end up thinking, what can I do to get back? And, oh, well, here's an avenue. Participants get information quite often about their plan. And at the bottom of those communications, it's always going to say, if you're unhappy with this, communicate with the Department of Labor, blah, 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 and, give them the avenue to communicate. So they'll see that. And if they are unhappy, that can lead you down a path. It may not be a lawsuit, but it can end up being, just as costly and certainly worrisome and wasteful of a lot of time. So
Yeah,
we
it's kind of
always
like
recommend
I always tell my kids
communication.
that, right? Like, yeah, fess up and let's get it fixed instead of trying to, hide it
Yeah.
and make it worse. So yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. And we always tell people, you may think that they'll never know or they'll never notice the fix, but you would be surprised, what what happens, that people will notice. Um,
Okay.
so just one other area I wanted to mention is corrective distributions. So we've talked about in previous podcasts about the discrimination testing that a plan has to go through, unless it's a safe harbor plan. Those tests can quite often lead to what are called corrective distributions, which actually ends up being a return of the contributions. So especially if you're a highly paid individual at the company, and you're contributing the 401k plan, if it fails the testing, you may have contributed $20,000 to your account during the year. By March of the following year, if it fails, one of the ways to fix it is to give you back that money. And of course, then you probably did that pre-tax, so there's going to be tax implications. That's another problem that can set off people is, they may have already filed their tax return. Now they've got a 1099 showing that they owe tax. So now they got to go back and, file an amended return. And now they're really unhappy. So again, communication here is the key. Let people know, especially if they're highly compensated, that this can happen. Try and test for it ahead of time, because there's ways that you can have them do their contribution so that this doesn't come into play. So there's other things you can do. I'd talk to your service provider, but another area that can cause upset people that can complain and potentially cause you problems.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think this was a really good summary, and I think just to try kind of draw it back to the beginning here a little bit is, when you mentioned the 2006 and the 2008 numbers, it's not like you mentioned numbers in the thousands, right? I think you mentioned 107 in 2008. So like, these are few and far between. It's not like they happen all the time, but it's still good practices just to have. I think the key words here throughout this podcast have been communication and documentation. And I think, the more you do of that, the easier the lawsuits are going to go if it does happen. Again, they're not that often. So that's kind of what I took from this interview.
Yeah, it's it does not happen often. Most people are not going to go. It's a pain on the individual to file a lawsuit or make a complaint. So it's not easy to do. So yeah, it's not going to happen all the time. But when it does happen, It's not a pleasant situation. So we like to bring it up. The things that we are recommending are best practices anyways. You should be doing all those things we talked about, not to avoid a lawsuit, but just because it's the right thing to do, and you should care about your employees and helping them save for retirement. So they're all the things you should be doing anyways. But just, don't fall down. I mean, sometimes we get so busy and so wrapped up in our day to day that, I just don't want to take time to take minutes on that meeting, or can't we just skip that meeting this time? And, just a reminder to stick with the program, do all those things that you need to do, and it'll come out much better in the long run.
And those are the things you can't get back. You can't go back and rehab a meeting. You can't go back and say, oh, I communicated that. I'm going to re-communicate that now. The lawsuit's coming.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure you do it at the time, you're timely, and you're thorough with both of those things. Because you can't go back and fix those after the fact.
That's absolutely right.
Great. Well, Kim, I thought this was a great topic, and definitely appreciate you bringing this up, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, Jamie.
Same
here.
Enjoyed this episode? Visit our website at summitcpa.net to get more tips and strategies for achieving 401k audit success. We're here to be a resource with ever-changing rules and regulations.